Hi, welcome to this presentation of SpenDB. SpenDB is an open source tool that allows anyone to quickly upload and analyze government financial data. It allows you to present the data, share it with others, and also if you're a web developer, you can use SpenDB's API to generate powerful visualizations. So in this demonstration I want to walk you through how you can import data into SpenDB and then analyze it using the built-in tools of SpenDB. Let's imagine that I've been browsing the web and I've discovered this page where the World Bank has been collecting data about government privatizations of big utilities and other organizations. So this is a really interesting data set. It contains information going back to 1988 up to 2008, and I want to understand a bit about how privatization has happened in different countries and in different contexts. But in order to understand this, just having these files that I can download here isn't really enough. What I want to do is I want to have them in a way that I can analyze them. So what I would normally do is download those files and then start cleaning them a bit, because data, when you get it off the source, is often going to be very messy and dirty. In this case, I've used a program called OpenRefine that allows me to kind of go through the data, see what missing fields are in there, find out what the structure of the data is, and I've cleaned it up a bit. So you can see here it names the sector that the company was in, it names the value of the privatization, but it also names the company name of the companies that have been privatized. And so this is a really clean data set, and I now want to upload it to SpenDB in order to understand more about the knowledge that is really in this data set. So going back to the platform, the first step I want to do is I want to sign up. So if I click here, it'll tell me, hey, we're collecting a lot of government information, why don't you help us out? I will sign in, and I've already got an account, otherwise you would sign up here. I'm just going to log in for the moment. So after I log in, it shows me a beautiful picture of myself, and it also allows me to very quickly import a data set over here. So before I can upload my data, I need to kind of name the data set. So I'm going to say World Bank Privatization Database. I think I may have missed. Nope, it's probably okay. So next step, I'm going to adapt the URL name, the slug of the dataset a bit, to be World Bank Privatization here. And maybe I'm going to chop the database as well. Next. Alright, in the next step I'm asked to upload some data. I could also take data of a web address if, for already I had it uploaded already somewhere, but in this case I'm just going to grab it off my own desktop. So on my desktop I've got a CSV file which I got out of Refine, and I'm just going to tell it to upload that. Next. This is uploading the data to a permanent storage on Amazon, and already it's done that. So I'm going to say the category, it's neither a budget dataset, as in a government budget, nor is it direct expenditure, it's an other. Currency, I remember reading on the website that it was US dollars, so I'm going to put that in here. Countries I'm going to leave blank for the moment because I simply didn't remember which countries were mentioned in this database and which ones weren't, but the language I know, it's English. Okay, and for the description I'm actually just going to steal the description of this website for the moment. Copy this over into the box here, and fantastic. Next up. Alright, so while I've been describing my data set, SpenDB has already gone and taken the file that I've uploaded, it's checked whether it's consistent as a data file, and it's also loaded it into a database. So this data is now available for me to query, but in order to query it, I first need to describe the structure of the data a bit so that SpenDB can make some good assumptions about how the data is structured and what fields to query for which information. So I'm going to say what measures are in my data set, and measures are basically numerical values that express financial amounts. So for example, in this data set, it's the amount that was kind of paid for each privatization. I've got 10 random sample values here. It's also offering me the year, because the year is also a number, but if I look here, I will see obviously this is years, but it's not really financial information, right? So I'm not going to select this here. Alright, that's it, all the financial data in my dataset. Next, I will specify dimensions. So dimensions are basically all the information that is used to describe the financial data. So that could be classifications applied to the data, information about companies, information about when the spending or the revenue has occurred, all that kind of contextual information that's also in every government financial data set. So in this case, I'm going to start off and I'm going to select the company name and make that into a dimension. And I'm just going to call that dimension company, and I'm going to select the attribute down here and say that attribute is name. So you can see that any dimension can have more than one attribute to it, and that makes sense if you look at something like this. So here I've got the country code and I've got the country name. In this case, again, I can select both of them and I can create a dimension. This dimension is now going to be called country, and it's selected code and name to basically be the attributes of that dimension. This is useful not just for countries, but also for classifications, for example, where often you have a code and then you have a label that matches that code. So in this case, I'm just going to say the label is actually the name field here, so that whenever in the user interface it wants to show me the country, it'll show me the country name and not the country code. And the key attribute I'm going to leave as the code. Okay, save. We can do this for a few more things. So for example, let me say I want to do it for the real sector here. I'm going to spell that properly and also rename the attribute to name, just for coherence and in order to have a unified thing. I'm going to do the same thing for sector. Sector, I can leave the name as is. I'm going to rename this as attribute to name and save it. Year, again, the same thing. I'm actually going to leave it as year here because the year number isn't really a label so much as just a number. All right. I can also leave some of these unstructured. So I don't really care about the deal type and the deal subtype for the moment. I can always go back to the screen and later on and extend the model and make sure that all the information is queryable. The problem is that if I don't map these, if I don't apply dimensions to these fields, they're not going to show up in all the query interfaces and in the user interface later on. But anyway, I'm going to say done right now. And what's happening now is that I've actually made a complete data set on SpenDB already. So you can see here, I can scroll over, I can see the value, I can see the sector, etc., etc. This is simply a spreadsheet. It's a nice way of exploring the data. For example, I could say, hey, I want to see only those entries that relate to this particular country. Let's say Mauritania. And there we go. Only 5 of those here. Fantastic. But I don't want to do that for the moment. What I want to do instead is maybe start doing some analysis. And one of the most powerful tools for analysis is something called pivot tables or cross tables. So in this case, for example, I can say I want to break up the privatization database by the name of the country. Okay, so now you can see that for every country it's showing me how many different entries there are in the privatization database and what the overall value is. Now, in order to understand this a bit better and to get a better sense of the data, I might want to sort the value. So now it's showing me China having the biggest amount of privatizations in this database, 326 entries, totaling up to 191 billion US dollars. That's quite impressive. Brazil runs as a second. So I'm really learning something about the data here. I could even go in and add a second row and say, for example, the sector, but this is probably going to get a bit crowded now. Let's see. China financial sector still on top, 95 billion, 29 different entries in the privatization database. So now you can see this is kind of split up both by the country and by the sector. Obviously, I can also remove the sector here and I can add the sector as a filter. So if I'm only interested, let's say, in financial services, I would filter this down like this. Now I have a filter that says the sector name needs to be financial, and I can see China, the Russian Federation, Brazil has disappeared from this chart. No, it's down here. Okay, so I'm really kind of exploring this data now. That's cool. But maybe something else that I want to do is I want to kind of see this in a graphical way. So for example, I could break it up and say the sector, wow, I've still got my filter active. So I'm going to drop the filter. Now I see all the sectors. You can see infrastructure being ahead, financial being a close second. This is not entirely unexpected, but it's a great way of exploring the proportions as well because it's very visual. I could also obviously choose a different type of the tile. So for example, I could go to the country name, and now I'm seeing all the different countries. But because there's more countries in here than are useful to present on a tree map like this, I'm getting a little warning that says, hey, only the 50 biggest countries in this aggregation are being shown. All right, so we've done quite a good bit of exploring here on the dataset. I just want to show you two things. One is obviously there's a lot of information being stored here about this dataset. This is the description we gave at the beginning. Down here we have the source data, and at any time we can kind of go back and get the source data that we uploaded before, or someone else who wants to kind of play with the data independently can get to it. And obviously there's also access to the API, which can be used by people who do data visualization or data analysis as a quick way of getting to the data while it's in SpenDB's database. Finally, you can manage the data. So all the steps you've just seen, whether it's the metadata step or data upload, can be repeated here, and I can go in here and say, hey, I forgot mapping out the deal type before, so I'm going to do that now, give it a nice name. And so I can basically go in here retroactively and fix up the dataset if I made any mistakes. So this is SpenDB. It's an open source project. I'm looking for contributors, and I'd be glad to hear your ideas about what it should do next. I'm really keen on playing with further ways to analyze the data and really help citizens like journalists, researchers, maybe even parliamentarians to better understand public financial information. Thanks for listening.